Hey, ugly. Is that your kid? Just like her mom, defective. After 13 years of not seeing each other, my ex-boyfriend Sean threw this insult at me, staring me and my daughter, sitting in her wheelchair. Up and down. I was about to lose my cool and snap back at him when my husband, David, stepped in from behind me and asked, "Is there a problem with my daughter?" David's deep baritone resonated so clearly that everyone around turned their heads. But I was the only one who noticed the chilling undertone in his voice. Looking back at Sean, I saw his face had gone pale for some reason. "My name is Rachel, I'm 35 years old. I live as a housewife with my 3-year-old daughter, Natalie, and my husband David, who's 3 years younger than me. The house we live in originally belonged to David's parents, but right after we got married, David's grandmother suddenly passed away. With David's grandfather living alone at an advanced age, his parents moved into his house to take care of him. And they let us have their old place. Partly to care for the grandfather and probably also to support David, who was just starting his own career. They generously provided us a rent-free home. Grateful for their kindness, I visited David's grandfather every other day, helping with household chores and driving him to medical appointments until I was pregnant with Natalie. After Natalie was born, I slowed down a bit but still visited David's grandfather once a month with David to help out, giving his parents time to relax at a day spa in exchange. You do so much, even with a child to care for. We're so grateful. She's right. David couldn't have married a better person. My in-laws always expressed their gratitude to me, but I feel deeply indebted to my husband David and my in-laws, no matter how much I do for them. That's because I've been saved twice in my life by the 3 of them, or rather, including David's twin sister Sarah, by all 4 of them. While this is David's first marriage, I was once married before, a failure. I met my ex-boyfriend, Sean, when I moved to a new apartment after getting accepted into college. We became friends, meeting on the same move-in day, exchanging tips on nearby stores and good restaurants while unpacking. Sean was studying at a prestigious, media-featured private university with a trendy campus, very different from my practical college. He was tall and conventionally handsome. He'd say things like, "Most students here are legacy enrollments. So folks like us from small towns feel out of place. But with you, Rachel, I feel easy." He started hanging around my place, and before long, we were practically living together. I was thrilled to be dating Sean. I thought, even if I didn't have the glamour like women on his campus, I'll just be the comforting presence Sean needs. I foolishly acted like a housekeeper, cooking and cleaning for him. Except for married couples, there's no way a decent guy would call someone he just started dating feeling easy. That's because feeling easy is just short for he feels easy because he doesn't have to do house chores, entirely self-centered. But there's truth to the saying love is blind. I ignored how self-centered Sean was. If only I could quit my job, but I can't because my allowance is too small and my classes are getting tougher. When he said that, I suggested, in that case, it's a waste to rent 2 rooms. Why don't we rent a slightly larger room? Don't worry about the rent. I then proposed that we move to a newly built apartment near the one where we met, offering to cover the entire rent myself. Of course, Sean quickly agreed, but for some reason, he insisted on having 2 separate phone lines, one for me and one for himself. When I expressed my suspicion, he said earnestly, "When I entered high school, my dad was assigned to work in the UK, and my mom went with him. They're pretty strict. If they find out we're living together, they'll not only cut off my allowance, but they might even tell me to drop out. You wouldn't want that, right? And your parents would be upset too if they knew we were living together, even if we do plan to get married someday." At the time, I was so focused on the idea of getting married someday that I didn't think too deeply about the rest. However, this fully shared living arrangement ended up placing a significant financial burden on me. Since the apartment lease was in my name, not just the rent but also all the utilities like electricity, gas, water, as well as the landline phone and internet bills, were inevitably drawn from my account. At first, he said things like, "Since you're covering the rent, I'll contribute more toward utilities," showing a noble intention. But he soon started saying, "Sorry, Rachel. I'm tight this month because of social obligations. I can't refuse when seniors or people from my seminar invite me out for drinks, especially since I need to consider job hunting. And before long, I ended up covering all the costs. Before I knew it, I was paying for groceries and even the beer Sean drank after his bath. The only thing he ever contributed to was the cost of delivery pizza when his friends came over. Moreover, whenever he invited friends from his seminar or extracurricular activities to our place, he'd always tell me, "I haven't mentioned about us, Rachel, because if they find out we're living together, they'll definitely tease us." He'd then insist that I stay out of the apartment for the day. However, with all my free time outside of classes consumed by my part-time job and household chores, I had no friends I could consult, vent to, or lean on. As a result, I had no choice but to spend the night at hotels or diners. While summers were tough, I felt utterly lost during winters, sitting in a park early in the morning, with not enough money and no place to go. I often cried, "What am I doing?" As time went by, both Sean and I became college seniors and began earnestly preparing for our job searches. By this time, I snapped at Sean, "Start paying your share. You're acting like a parasite." Suddenly, his voice turned sweet, and he said, "Sorry, I just couldn't help but rely on you, Rachel. Please, don't be so mad at me." Clearly trying to appease my mood. The next day, he came to pick me up at work, which was unusual. When we arrived at my apartment, I found he had cleaned up the place and set up a dinner, flowers, wine, and cake, all seemingly procured from a high-end department store. I was moved by Sean's rare thoughtfulness, something I hadn't experienced in all our years together. He topped it off by presenting me with a ring from a popular casual brand at the time. As he slipped the ring on my finger, he said, "This is all I can afford for now, but one day I'll buy you a diamond worth 3 months of my salary." I remember blurting out that I felt the happiest ever in my life, something I'd probably heard somewhere before. But that happy memory is the only one that stands out. Soon after, Sean said, "I can't decide between a job or studying abroad, but I know that if I stay like this, I'll just end up relying on you again. This is a big crossroads in life, so I want to try making it on my own for a while." He moved out, saying he'd share an apartment with some friends. Suddenly being left alone made me anxious, but since Sean had left some of his belongings and texted or called twice daily, I decided to shift my mindset, thinking, I shouldn't feel down, I have to work hard on my job search too. Eventually, I secured an offer from my first-choice mid-sized trading company. However, around that time, strange calls started coming more frequently to the landline registered under Sean's name. The answering machine would pick up, and I'd overhear unsettling messages like, "We'll be in trouble if you don't pay back by this week." Or, "Don't think you can mess with us." I hurriedly called Sean's phone, but he just said, "Don't worry about it." Soon after, ominous letters with words like "demand for payment" and "final notice" started showing up in the mailbox. When I questioned him firmly, he snapped, "Stop nagging me. I've stayed with a defective loser like you for so long, so consider it your duty to pay up." He hung up and wouldn't answer my calls again. It struck me that I didn't know his new address because I'd been fooled by his regular check-ins. When I contacted the university, I was told, "We can't provide information to unrelated individuals," leaving me desperate. In a last-ditch effort to find a clue, I decided to open the boxes Sean had left in his room. All I found were documents hinting at loans from multiple financial companies, old clothes with no apparent value, and a used laptop. There were no clues to his parents' address in England or where he might be living now. And it dawned on me that I had been nothing more than a cash cow for Sean. Worse still, soon after losing contact with him, 2 men in suits showed up at my apartment. I found out that the loans which I thought were made by Sean were actually made jointly under name of Sean and me. I was too into Sean to be able to find out that he fooled me. The blow of being abandoned by Sean was enough, but this additional hit was crushing. My husband, David, and his family were the ones who saved me. That's why I'll do anything I can for my in-laws and husband. However, while I was pushing my daughter Natalie's wheelchair and walking through the shopping mall with David, we unexpectedly ran into someone I hadn't anticipated meeting. It was Sean himself, my ex-boyfriend who had betrayed me in a cruel manner and abandoned me 13 years ago. When he noticed me staring at him in disbelief, he looked both at me and my daughter in the wheelchair, rudely scrutinizing us before approaching with an unpleasant smirk. His first words were, well, look who it is. Is that your kid? Takes after her defective mom. The thought of not only myself but also an innocent girl being slandered made my mind flare up, but the next moment, someone smoothly stepped in between Sean and me. It was my husband, David. Is there a problem with my daughter? David's clear, resounding voice drew the attention of passers-by, who stopped to see what was happening. Yet, amid all this, Sean turned pale and didn't respond at all. Natalie and I exchanged glances, wondering what was going on as Sean nervously yelled at David, "This is a private matter. It's none of your business." Unfazed, David responded with a smirk, "It's my business, which is why I'm speaking up. Otherwise, I wouldn't waste my breath on you." Turning to Natalie, he smiled and said, "Mom and Dad have something to handle. Your aunt should be here soon, so you go on ahead to her place. Okay?" I was shocked, but Natalie, calm beyond her years, just said, "All right. You better come soon, okay," and left with David's sister, Sarah, and her kids. David leaned in closer to Sean, now visibly shaken, and said, "Let's have an adult conversation, shall we? Here. We'd be putting on a free show for everyone. Let's move." Sean isn't particularly short, but being stared down by David, who stands nearly 6 feet 3 inches tall and speaks in a towering manner with unsmiling eyes. He must have felt that it would be better than facing curious stares from those around him. Surprisingly, he readily agreed to David's suggestion and consented to change the location. The three of us took a taxi to David's office building. After seeing the button David pressed and the tenant directory next to it, indicating that David was heading to a law firm, Sean paled again. However, he couldn't run away at this point and stepped into the elevator with David. Since David had the day off and appeared with a stern expression, accompanied by me, his wife, and our guest. The office staff were initially surprised but regained their composure by the time we were ushered into the reception room at the back. While I was watching David's profile, I managed to calm my mind. In contrast, the only restless and uneasy one was Sean. David noticed this and smirked as he dropped a stack of documents on the table. "What a coincidence," he said. "I was just preparing the report for Mr. Thompson. Who knew I'd meet the man himself before handing it over?" Sean's face turned even paler, while I was left confused. Sensing my bewilderment, David began explaining to both Sean and me. Mr. Thompson, whom David mentioned, was the chairman of a large machine tool company and a major client of David's firm. He had personally called David recently to investigate a man after introducing his granddaughter, who had just returned from college in England. "When I visited their sales department, guess who I found there? You, Sean Smith," David said, still smirking, while Sean looked increasingly distressed. According to David, who observed the situation out of the corner of his eye, Mr. Thompson's granddaughter had promised a future together with an American she had met while studying in the same university's graduate school in the UK. The man dropped out of an American university just before graduation and went to England and enrolled in a local university. Once he graduated from university, he worked as a locally hired employee for an American company. But he was not satisfied with that and went on to study in graduate school. Mr. Thompson's granddaughter is an intelligent woman who deeply fell for the man who supported her through her culture shock and homesickness after she entered a university in the UK. After completing his master's program ahead of her, he returned to the States with her this time, and together, they asked her grandfather, Mr. Thompson, to approve their marriage and his joining the company. The chairman had no idea Sean was in England around his granddaughter. However, the chairman's daughter, Megan, who traveled to England for business, had met the man during her visits and was even introduced to his parents, who were supposedly living in England. Megan herself felt at the time, "It's not my place to meddle in my adult daughter's relationship." But the idea of demanding marriage immediately after returning, and even getting him into their family-run business as a future executive candidate, seemed too sudden to her. After discussing it privately, the chairman and Megan asked David's firm, which they'd known for generations, to investigate Sean's background. After hearing that, a feeling of dread washed over me, and I turned to David, looking straight at Sean sitting in front of me, and asked, "You can't be serious. That man isn't Sean, is he?" But before David could respond, Sean himself snapped back, "What? Are you saying I'm not good enough? We broke up ages ago. So it's none of your business who I marry. Sean has always been nothing more than a dark chapter in my life, and I have no interest in him now. But there are still plenty of things I want to say to him. We broke up, huh? Yeah, we did. But right before that, you fooled me and made me have joint loans with you before skipping town. Sean looked stunned for a moment, but then smirked and said, "You were happy to be able to become my girlfriend back then, weren't you? Paying for the loans for me wasn't a big deal at all, right?" He pointed at David and added, "As I came back to the States and checked. I was glad to see you were married. I thought I'd find you waiting around for me since no one else would marry an ugly, defective woman like you." His disdainful tone made my blood boil again, but David stopped me once more. "Good grief. I thought you'd changed since you were so quiet earlier, but I guess trash will always be trash," he declared. When Sean disappeared and the debt collectors came after me, it was David's father who first stepped in to help. I had been a tutor to David's younger twin sister, Sarah, who is now my sister-in-law. Although bright, Sarah had become a target for bullying and was often absent from school. When her parents hired me to tutor her, I discovered she was being ostracized for defending a friend in a similar situation. I tried to cheer her up through both studying and listening to her troubles, which made her parents and grandparents take a liking to me, treating me like family. When the debt collectors showed up at my apartment, Sarah had just been accepted to her desired college. She and her mother had come to share the news but were shocked to find me in such a miserable state, having been tricked to have debts. Enraged, they immediately called David's father and grandfather, who brought me to their law firm. My father and grandfather put all their efforts into finding a solution. They sought discussions with the financial company to void the loans which you deceived her into making. It seems like it was tough. But both my father and grandfather are known for being skilled in this field, so in the end, it all went well. In reality, I think the efforts to negotiate with the tricky financial company must have required tremendous effort. Despite barely managing to graduate from college due to the sudden disaster, the shock of being abandoned by Sean, and all the surrounding commotion, I ended up losing the job offer I had. I worried about how I would pay the attorney fees. But my father-in-law suggested that I work at his firm if I didn't have a job, leading to my employment at this office. I wanted to repay them at least in some way, so I worked with all my heart and soul from morning till night, even on my days off. I tried to pay the attorney fees in installments from my salary. But they accepted only a little more than the actual expenses to avoid getting reprimanded by the Bar Association. In the end, thanks to their efforts, the loans made under my name became void. So technically, you're not Rachel's ex-boyfriend. You're just a stain on her life. Despite this, Sean still didn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation. "Well, anyway, my debt must have expired by now," he scoffed. However, at that moment, David burst into laughter. Facing a bewildered Sean, David said, "The statute of limitations hasn't expired. I expect the debt collectors will come for you early next week." Sean himself might have thought, it's already expired, since it's been 13 years. However, thanks to my father-in-law and grandfather-in-law, the loan became void for me. But Sean still has responsibility for that. And the financial institution, which couldn't trace Sean's whereabouts, devised a plan and transferred his debt entirely to a debt collection agency under their influence. In cases like Sean's, where borrowers try to evade repayment or default on their payments, financial institutions sell these non-performing loans to debt collection agencies. From that point on, the collection is handled by professionals specializing in debt recovery, a process known as debt assignment. Although the collection doesn't involve illegal methods like it used to, given their extensive legal knowledge, they apparently use every legal means available to recover the debt. Of course, the debt collection agency that bought Sean's claims was no exception and pursued the procedures one by one. As a result, the statute of limitations was extended for another 10 years due to a court ruling in the collection company's favor, making the debt fully valid even now. On top of that, with all the interest and legal fees added up, Sean's debt has multiplied many times over. After hearing this, Sean's face fell, but he quickly tried to dismiss it. "Well, if I can just get into that company as their granddaughter's husband, I'll be fine. It's about the thoughtless Sean. Even with this unexpected snag, he still thought that if he married into the company and became an executive, repaying his debt would be easy. However, when David said, "Do you remember what I just told you? Who was it again that asked me to investigate you this time?" His face turned completely pale. David is Sarah's twin brother, but back when I was tutoring Sarah, we had only exchanged greetings. He later developed an interest in me after hearing Sarah speak highly of me. Later, unexpectedly, I started working at the office alongside David, who had taken the bar exam while still in college and became a lawyer in the shortest possible time. When David said, "I want to date you with marriage in mind," I declined, explaining my past and feeling I couldn't repay the debt I owed my father-in-law and grandfather-in-law. But David already knew everything about my past with Sean and still wanted to marry me. His parents, grandparents, and Sarah all supported our relationship. By that time, David and I were happily married, blessed by my parents in the countryside who had come to know everything and were concerned about my future. Unlike me, who intended to keep our past failures buried, David had secretly harbored a desire for many years to get back at Sean. When Mr. Thompson's request came through, David initially thought it was a coincidence. But upon further investigation, he confirmed that Mr. Thompson's granddaughter's boyfriend, Sean Smith, was the same Sean who had discarded me like trash. He put together a report and was set to submit it on Monday. "You might have gotten away with it over there, but in the States, that's not going to fly. Smith is the most common surname here. So you probably thought you could just claim it was a case of mistaken identity if something went wrong," he said before sharply warning, "Don't think such shallow schemes will work on a lawyer." He revealed that the report had already been scanned and sent to both Mr. Thompson and his granddaughter. "And by the way, we've also informed the lenders of your whereabouts. You should expect a visit from them soon," David said with a delighted laugh. Sean suddenly burst into tears and began begging, "Please, you have to tell them it was a mistake. One man's life is on the line." However, with a chilly smile, David said firmly to Sean, "Why would I, as a lawyer, have to go against my principles by telling blatant lies to a client? Especially to someone who hurled insults like ugly and defective at a young girl in a wheelchair due to an injury? In reality, my daughter Natalie was injured while on her way to violin lessons after being knocked over by a high schooler on their phone. Since then, Shannon and her kids, worried about Natalie's depressed state, decided to celebrate after she won a prize at an art contest. Today was meant to be a day of joy, but instead, we were dragged into this mess by Sean. David is utterly devoted to Natalie, and on top of Sean's past behavior, he was furious at his words against her. Even though David turned him down coldly, Sean continued to cry and plead, "Please, my whole life depends on this. How can you ruin everything?" However, David declared, "Ruining someone's life? What right do you have to say something like that? What you tried to do to Rachel and Mr. Thompson's granddaughter is the very definition of ruining someone's life. When you curse others, you dig two graves, it's simply a boomerang that's come back to you. You should accept it with grace." Then, as Sean tried to cling to him, David brushed Sean's arm aside and said, "Your exit is that way." He called the building security, who promptly escorted Sean out of the office. David and I exchanged smiles as we listened to Sean's sobs fade away. Later, I heard Sean rush to his girlfriend, Mr. Thompson's granddaughter, with a string of excuses. But she was already growing suspicious of him. So when the truth came to light, she was furious and warned him not to show up himself in front of her again. However, that wasn't the end of it, as Mr. Thompson and Megan, who felt their beloved daughter and granddaughter had been hurt, didn't let things rest. To prevent Sean from stalking his ex-girlfriend and sending her a mountain of messages and emails in an attempt to reconcile, she filed a complaint with the police, stating that there is a suspicion that he tried to marry under a false background and attempted to infiltrate the company as a con artist. While no criminal charges were brought, the police issued a warning over his stalking behavior. Despite this, Sean persisted and was arrested and charged after multiple incidents. Although he received probation, he was still given a prison sentence. After being released, Sean tried to return to his old life, but even with probation, his criminal record prevented him from finding employment anywhere, whether in New York or elsewhere. Desperate, He attempted to move to the UK for work, but the conviction made it impossible for him to obtain a visa, forcing him to abandon his plans. After learning the full story from Mr. Thompson and the police, Sean's parents disowned him, leaving him with no one to turn to. He found himself completely alone. Meanwhile, the debt collectors were relentless, so he had no choice but to search for a part-time job. However, he couldn't get a phone due to being on a blacklist, and his license had expired while abroad, leaving him without valid ID. With no fixed address, he couldn't find any decent work. From what I've heard, he now works at a shady handyman agency referred by the collection agency, living in a dorm with no privacy, working day and night. But I don't care, so I chose to forget as soon as I heard. On the other hand, David and I moved from our suburban house to a condo near the private elementary school Natalie plans to attend after her leg injury fully healed. Natalie didn't want to ride the train anymore, so she's happy to be able to take the bus and loves the view from her high-floor room. She enjoys each day. Our previous home had been David's parents' renovated house, and I worried about their feelings when David suggested selling it to move to the condo. But since handing the house over to us, David's parents had been enjoying their second life by the seaside, urging us to pursue our happiness. It's closer to my office, and we spend more time together as a family. I'm glad we went for it, David said, enjoying our new life as much as Natalie. Seeing the two of them so happy makes me want to take on a new challenge myself.